That sounds familiar. That, of course, is Bernard Herrmann's insane score for Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. We have it coming live. This massive collection that I scored from a Big Lots a while ago. $20 for all that Hitchcock. And of course, the film we're focusing on in this edition of Ethan's Movie Lounge is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which is a masterpiece. Like it's to have a masterpiece this late in a career for a director. I mean, this was still like peak Hitchcock. You know, he was coming off a hell of a run. Like, I mean, shit, dude. We can go scroll back into this page and we'll cover some of these other ones. But I mean, starting with Vertigo, going through like a very like shitty period of his life, you know, and putting all your neuroses into a fucking badass work of art. And then this fun little gem, fucking North by Northwest. But then we get to fucking Psycho, which, mind you, he had been doing films in color for most of the time. And then like this one specifically shot in black and white. I would say for good reason, because I would argue that this film is not as sinister if it's shot in color. And of course, Hitchcock's main reason for shooting in black and white is because he figured that the blood would be too gory for like color and stuff, and which it might have been. And especially in 1960 when this film was made, you know, this caused quite a stir, because I mean, this was some pretty heavy shit. You know, it was very ahead of its time as far as structurally and content wise. And I have a sneaking suspicion that the only reason that Hitchcock made Psycho was to reclaim his crown that Andre George Clouzot had stole from him back in for 5 years prior when he did Les Diaboliques. Probably mispronouncing that name, but you know, we could have fucking, let's see, visual references. I don't know. I don't see it on my shelf. I got shit all over the place. But in 60 though, you know, that was kind of the shifting of the tide for cinema, you know, not just in America but all over the world, you know, having these just the, you know, the French New Wave, and you know, and the second wave of like these great Italian artists coming after the Italian neorealist movement, you know, and then of course Bergman going, you know, a whole other batshit crazy way. But what's so brilliant about Psycho is the film itself starts out as film noir. You know, we center around this character played by Janet Leigh. You know, she works in a real estate office, and or something like that. She steals a bunch of money from this rich dude that, you know, just like likes to lay down cash to seem like a big guy. And of course, you know, we also, the film opens with Janet Leigh's character having an affair with her dude, and you know, a lot of, on the low and stuff. I forget, somebody may be married or something. There's just a real like sleaziness to it, and of course, like Janet Leigh was a gorgeous woman, and of course, the closest thing you get to showing her tits is just her in a bra, you know. But I mean, even that is sexy in and of itself. But she decides to steal this money and then go run off with her dude, and but in the halfway through, or maybe the 30 to 40 minutes into the film, you know, it takes a hell of a turn because she ends up stopping at this like random motel, the Bates Motel, which is owned by this very creepy looking dude played by, or named Norman Bates, played brilliantly by Anthony Perkins. This is definitely the performance that Anthony Perkins is most known for, and it's also one of his best performances, if not the best performance he's given. You know, because, and honestly, you would think Janet Leigh would know better after Touch of Evil to not go to seedy motels and shit, because you know, she gets an even more rude awakening than she did in Touch of Evil, because here then she ends up, you know, taking a really good shower and then ends up stabbed to death by a faceless woman. And you know what's brilliant about those sequences too, the brilliant thing about the black and white is that you can show all this stuff and you can easily blur stuff out. You know, the way you can show a shower sequence without any nudity. Because mind you, in 1960, we're still in the Hays Code. You know, the Hays Code didn't go away till like maybe 7 years later. But I feel like Psycho is one of those movies that's responsible for the decline of the Hays Code, because where you're, you know, the thing about it is you had a brief period in the 50s where like people didn't really care about adult entertainment. You know, it was all escapism, you know, or American propaganda or some shit. But in the 60s, though, you know, you kind of had a resurgence of that post World War II adult cinema of, like, you know, the dark film noir dramas and the other stuff that tended to deal with heavier subjects. And here we have, you know, this guy, or seemingly a woman killing, an old woman killing all these people because she's jealous of her son or some shit. Then that is one of the biggest reveals, one of the best reveals of all time, because, you know, you've also got a private detective looking for Janet Leigh. She's gone missing, you know, because we see Norman, he's cleaning up the crime scene, you know, it's his mother doing it or whatever the fuck. And then that the private detective, played brilliantly by Martin Balsam, he gets a rude awakening too, you know, because he's really grilling the dude and then ends up fucking stabbed in the fucking face. That's what he's falling down the stairs. There's some brilliant shots. You got to think about Hitchcock, you know, as a visual artist, you know, he really couldn't be like topped, because the thing about it is this man started out in silent film. So he understood the power of the moving image, and that you can convey a lot of things with just the moving image. And there's a lot of like visual poetry in this film, because there's not a lot of dialogue in the film. Honestly, the most dialogue you get in the film is when that shrink explains everything in the end. And, you know, that's honestly the lamest part in the picture, because, you know, once everything's explained to you, okay, sure, it makes sense, but it's so boring. The whole, like, not knowing what the fuck's going on and just having all this suspense build, because Hitchcock, there's a reason why they called him the master of suspense. Dude could really just build suspense to a crescendo. And, you know, watching just the interaction between Bates and Janet Leigh's character, and seeing how, you know, he's a voyeur and all this stuff, and then, you know, once the sister of Janet Leigh's character in the film, played by Vera Miles, and the Janet Leigh character's lover, they go to the motel to investigate themselves, and then what the sister uncovers is the dead mother of Norman Bates, and we see that, oh shit, it's actually Norman Bates dressed up as his mother. And we're flirting with transgender territory over transvestites, as they call them in this film. But he's technically not that, as the shrink explains, you know, and he goes, and I'm not going to dive deep, but essentially what it is anytime he becomes aroused by a woman, he becomes his mother, and he has to kill that desire, basically. So it's like he's technically not killing these people, but it's his mother, his side of his personality. And you know, that ending shot of just Norman just sitting quiet, and you hear the mother's voice, you know, we clearly see, you know, this is a very deranged man, you know. And of course, like, you know, upon later viewings, you know, when certain things come to light about, especially Anthony Perkins' homosexuality, that adds layers to the performance. But even if you didn't know anything about Anthony Perkins' personal life, you still can admire the fact that this is a great fucking performance. It's chilling, it's calculated, you know, like he clearly understands, this is clearly a great actor. And of course, like, Hitchcock, one of the best directors, and of course, like, this was the peak of his run, you know. This was right before it kind of hit a downswing. But like I said, for as long as he had been in movies, even up to this point, to have this colossal of a motion picture come out, you know, and just, it's one of those things, is the more you watch it, the more you understand the brilliance of it. Not just that score by Bernard Herrmann, which might be the best score that he did for Hitchcock, because that one really, you know, like, whatever the fuck is going on, it just accentuates it even more. And of course, Psycho is a film that has been, you know, ripped off, remade all through, like, from 1960 on. Because what it does is it starts out as film noir, and then halfway through the film, it creates the slasher film genre, you know. And then what would be 18 years later, you know, John Carpenter with Janet Leigh's daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, would do that again with Halloween, and pretty much set the tone for all slasher films from the 80s onward. And of course, Like there's the big, probably the best remake of Hitchcock's Psycho is Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill, where he really plays up the transgender element more and does that whole thing where it's like your lead star Angie Dickinson, not really your lead star because she gets killed 30 minutes into the movie. It's another trope that that they did with Scream, where they have Drew Barrymore in the beginning of the film, and you think, oh, this is going to be the main character, but she ends up getting knifed, not even like 10 minutes into the fucking movie, which the reach of Hitchcock is insane, even to this. I mean, you got all kinds. There's every country has their own Hitchcock. Italy has Dario Argento. Of course, the 80s you had De Palma. And then even in the mid to late 60s you had Polanski was taking up that mantle of DJ Caruso, the Hitchcock of the MTV generation. Of course, he did the best Rear Window remake with Disturbia, and of course there's a few of them that can really just nail Hitchcock. And I feel like almost every director, whenever they set out to do a thriller, they're doing a Hitchcock type film, or at least they're using Hitchcock as a blueprint to do the film. And so it's just intriguing to see how many times you can remake Hitchcock. I know Lord knows De Palma has done that many times. So it's the one thing to look for. I yet to have seen Gus Van Sant's remake in the 90s, which some people claim is a shot-for-shot remake. So that's something to look forward to whenever I get into the whole remake leg of my 70s versus the 90s matchups. I'm going to put Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill against Gus Van Sant's Psycho to see who remade Psycho the best. And of course, it's been imitated by many others. A lot of sequences. Specifically when she sees her boss at the beginning. That's Tarantino kind of uses that in Pulp Fiction, where Butch Coolidge runs into Marcellus Wallace. Only he honestly makes that sequence better. And like I said, Psycho is a very influential film, but it's also a very great film. This is one of Hitchcock's best, and mind you, Hitchcock did make a lot of sleepers where it's like you can understand the visual artistry, but you can't really enjoy the film. But Psycho, I would argue, is a very enjoyable film. Probably the lamest part of it is when the shrink is explaining it all at the end. But to be able to do this, because the thing about it is with no matter what time or place it is, horror films and comedies are usually the ones that get away with more shit, because you can use stuff as metaphor and innuendo, and you can just play around with it. So this has been Ethan's Movie Lounge. And of course, if you have not seen Psycho, watch it. It's a masterpiece. You'll see where everybody's been ripping it off, and nobody has ever come close. Maybe Richard Franklin with that sequel, Psycho 2. Given the fact that Richard Franklin is the Hitchcock of Australia, it's still nothing compares to that original. I mean, look at this whole box of motherfucking genius right here, Alfred Hitchcock. We'll cover more Hitchcock, but figure, what better one to start with than Psycho. Everybody knows it. They know the music. If anything, they know that motherfucking shower sequence, that fucking scream, that fucking killing it. So stay tuned for more Ethan's Movie Lounge. As it, random shit will pop up. Videos will be sparse, intermittent, whatever the fuck. You'll at least see 70s versus the 90s every week. At least one. Maybe I do 2, 3, 4. Who knows? Shit'll just come. Stay tuned for all kinds of good shit.